Hello, I'm Waqar Rizvi, and this is Scope. We're going to start off by discussing Iran. Now, as we know, Donald Trump has threatened Iran and has said that he's instructed the U.S. Navy to, quote unquote, shoot down and destroy any and all Iranian gunboats that harass American ships. Now, just last week, the U.S. Navy released video that it showed, showed Iranian naval vessels conducting dangerous and harassing approaches towards U.S. Navy warships. Now, in response to that tweet of Donald Trump and that threat, an Iranian general of the Revolutionary Guard has said that the Iranians would also then answer any action by U.S. forces in a decisive manner. Now, this is, of course, all in context of the fact that we're talking about a time when tensions have already risen between the United States and Iran, especially on Iraqi soil since the assassination of Qasem Soleimani there and the ensuing tensions that have taken place in that regard. Let's discuss all of that a bit further. We're now joined by Reza Yeganehshakib, who is a faculty member at Santa Monica College in California. He's a history professor and geopolitics and energy analyst. He's joining us now from Long Beach, California. Joining us from Palmerston North, New Zealand, is Sirous Amerian, who is a tutor and guest lecturer at the Center for Defense and Security Studies at Massey University. Sirous and Reza, thank you both for your time today. Reza, let me start with you. What do you make of Trump's tweet? The Pentagon says that this is essentially an order by the commander-in-chief. Do you really think that they would carry it out, though?
Hello, thanks for having me today. This is nothing new. As a matter of fact, whatever a president says just within a few months from the election time has electoral values, and it's aligned with his basically electoral campaign. It's mainly for the internal use. Nothing really on the ground would change. The same traffic is expected in the Persian Gulf. The United States boats, the Iranian boats will do that. But according to Trump, he says, he will order the Navy to shoot down the Iranian boats. I don't know how far they can fly so that it will be shot down from the ground. So that's another thing. But in regards to that, this could be also considered as a distraction to be used to cover, actually, or create cover for Trump in his incapability, the difficulty that this administration has to cope with the new situation caused by the pandemic. The economic growth of the United States is contracted already minus 7%.
Yeah.
The rest of the world the same, by the way, like Asia 2.8% or Europe minus 7% contraction. But the United States economic fall is a majestic fall. It's different because the majority of the world is using the American basically dollar, and they are basically completely connected with the United States. So inside the country, there is a massive difficulty, the government incapability to send aids and distribute aids to the people in the United States. Now, today, there are less than 900,000 of Americans infected with coronavirus. It's why 4.775 million tests only have been performed. Imagine if the tests are running more, the numbers will be growing. On the other hand, again, this is another meaningless statement because the Navy commanders also know that Iran is not Iraq, Iran is not Afghanistan. United States is not really able to crush Iran. Iranians can easily not only create lots of trouble in the Persian Gulf, but easily can basically burn the entire West Asia with all of the basically huge capabilities.
Okay, so let me bring in Sirous then. Sirous, what are your thoughts on this? Because, even if it is, as Reza there said, that there is an argument that this is being used as a distraction by Donald Trump away from his, what many people would say chaotic handling of the coronavirus pandemic. Nevertheless, this is quite a risky tactic to use, isn't it? Because there's a lot of room for miscalculation on both sides' parts.
I think just right after that declaration by Trump in his Twitter, there were words out of the Navy that they kind of watered down this order of shooting whatever gets close or whatever's in the air or in the sea. I think one of the positive things about the U.S. military and the Department of Defense and Pentagon is that although they are bound, they're legally bound to listen to what the president has and that they are under civilian control, but they have a better understanding of what's happening. And sometimes, they take their orders, but it's they on the ground who carry it out. So this is as your other guest said, it's nothing new. And, it was already watered down by the DOE. And this has been happening ever since Donald Trump came into power, that he makes some declaration because he saw something on Fox News or some other news channel, and then he makes a Twitter account, and then people in the administration try to make it more logical, make it more rational, and then put it into policy. So just because he said it, it's not that it's going to happen right now or in the next 24 hours or so. I think, the system is more mature than the single person who heads it, and will act in the best manner and most professional manner, I guess.
Reza, how do you assess how Iran has acted in international waters, right? Because there has been concern on the part of how Iran has acted regionally for a while now, right? We had those attacks on those oil ships as well. Then we had, the attack on the Saudi Aramco. I mean, there's a lot going on that is being alleged that is being carried out by Iran. And then now we have these, according to the U.S., harassment of its ships as well. Does that show on the part of Iran a level of immaturity, naivete, or provocation even? Is it trying to be provocative?
Well, first of all, this is a Persian Gulf. We are not talking about the Gulf of Mexico or the Gulf of Peace. So it's basically very close to the Iranian territory. So the question is that what the American Navy is doing 7,000 miles away from home in the Persian Gulf. In this particular occasion, as a matter of fact, there was an Iranian logistic frigate passing through, blocked by an American ship. And then, of course, Iranians returned the favor. And then they sent 11 high-speed boats to give hard time to the American ships. But eventually, of course, there has been lots of things that happened during the past 2 years. As you mentioned, the attack on Saudi Aramco and basically attacks on those oil tankers. None of them has been proven that Iran was involved in all of those, especially attack on the Saudi Aramco that plunged the oil output of Saudi Aramco by 50% was the act of the Yemeni resistance forces, just responding to the Saudi atrocities in Yemen, which has started since 2015. And the Iranians basically are defending themselves in the region, in the vicinity of their borders. So the party which is creating a hostility and is taking advantage of that hostility, 50% of the American people's tax money goes to the military, most of which to the Navy, as a matter of fact. So it's a huge industry. The American establishment needs this hostility. This hostility creates basically lots of profit for the war industry. It must be there, but they must play this game very delicate. Make sure it doesn't end up in a war, because then that will damage this president, all of the slogans that this president says at the beginning when he started his campaign, that I will not start another war in the region. Especially this threat must remain at least until he's getting reelected, because the numbers are very dire. We don't see any recovery until the end of 2021. United States spent billions of dollars investing in oil and gas. The assumption was that let's put sanctions on Iran, Venezuela, and Russia, and especially Venezuela and Iran are off from the global supply chain of oil, and replace American oil with that, then put pressure on China to force them to purchase more American goods, all of them based on this assumption that the American energy dominance will be a permanent thing, and America will become a net exporter of oil, which basically in 2019 was. America exported 9 million barrels of oil, imported 8.6 million barrels of oil.
Yeah. Sirous, what are your, from the point of view of those who would say that it's Iran which is being provocative in the region, right? But at the same time, there is in the context of the situation within Iranian borders about A, coronavirus, and B, sanctions, right? And a significantly weaker economy. Do you think that the Iranians would want to be picking a fight at this point? I mean, what advantage would they have by picking a fight with the U.S. right now?
Well, I mean, first we've got to look at the geography of the Hormuz Strait. The shipping passages that go through Hormuz are I think 2 miles wide, and they sometimes do actually come into Iran's territorial waters. So I see that Iran has legal rights to check the passage to see whether it's there's a specific legal term I can't remember right now that it's not causing any harm. So we've got to keep this in mind. And also, I think this can also be a bit of a political messaging. Iran saying that, hey, we're not nudging back so that you can come forward, because this is what Americans seem to be doing everywhere. If you step back one step, they're going to come ahead. They're going to come forward. So they're not going to leave you out. So just in case that, because of all the coronavirus and all the aid and everything, the sanctions, if Iran says, okay, now that we're under pressure, let's dial things down, it's not going to, they're not going to get the same response from the Americans. They're not going to say, okay, the Iranians have stepped back, so let us step back as well. We've seen Donald Trump as anything other than rational, at least in foreign policy. So I think Iranians might be doing the good thing, because if they step back, if they give more room for these ships to maybe enter Iranian territorial waters, I'm not sure if they did or not. But, if they step back, the Americans are going to come forward and take their place. The same way as, they're doing freedom of navigation operations, in the Taiwan Strait, in the South China Sea, trying to enforce international laws and regulations. The UNCLOS, I think the UNCLOS is also relevant in the Hormuz Strait. And, because ships come into Iranian water at times, according to that body of law, I'm not a legal expert, they do have rights to maybe come and, see what's happening there and regulate.
And then in the midst of all this, we also had that rocket that has been launched by Iran, the Iranian military more specifically. As you know, Reza, the argument has always been that this would be cover for Iran's quote-unquote ballistic missile program. Do you believe that?
Well, for Iranians, it was not a luxury or a cover or a distraction. Rather, it was a need to have access to this space. When you're facing a threat from a country which has 290 satellites operating, United States, and has 52 bases all around your country. So you have all the reasons to defend yourself, and also think about the future. It's not just for the military usage. In the future phases, the satellite would have some functions for reconnaissance to be used in agriculture, in weather, and of course, all of the other functions of a satellite, which is intelligence collection. And Iranians do not need really cover for that, because it would be so naive. Anybody who knows, how these missiles can function can understand that, what are the range of the Iranian missiles, or if, for example, if there is any threat, which party is imposing first and foremost this threat. And because of these things, I think that the Iranians felt the necessity. They need that to also have access to the science and technology themselves, because they are under sanctions. Iran is under sanctions and imposed by the United States. Therefore, everything must be done domestically. Technology must be sustained regardless of the sanctions. And this is a continuation of the resistive economy.
All right, Sirous, I'll give you the final word in just under a minute if you can, please. Do you think that goal, and I know I've asked you this question in past conversations as well, but the goal of the U.S. seemingly has always been through this maximum pressure campaign to bring Iran to the negotiating table, to negotiate an even tougher deal. Is the U.S. any closer to achieving that goal?
I don't think so. I don't think what the U.S. end goal is possible, because they want so much. I mean, just go back a couple of months in history and look at the declaration that Mike Pompeo said that, hey, we want these lists of things out of Iran. If we take that to be the end goal of the U.S., well, that's not going to be possible, because essentially it means that Iran should leave power, go out and give the full country's control to the U.S. I don't think that's possible. We haven't seen much in the way of changing behavior from Iran under this maximum pressure campaign. So at least until now, it hasn't had the outcomes that's been asked since it started.
All right, we'll leave it there at that. Of course, appreciate Sirous and Reza for their time today and their vital insight for us to understand the situation as it is. Seemingly, then, the U.S. threat, or the Trump threat more specifically, as he carried out in that tweet that he put online, is something essentially that's more for domestic consumption rather than what's actually going to happen on the ground, or in this case, on the seas. The U.S. Navy, as Sirous there said, is probably more mature and understands the situation on the high seas and would make a better, more understanding decision, mature decision on the seas, and would not want to pick a fight with the Iranians at this point in time. Possibly Donald Trump, too, does not really want to actually pick a fight with Iran because he's always wanted less militarism. At least that's what he said publicly. So he's possibly not also picking a fight with the Iranians, but is just trying to saber rattle for the sake of his own political future, really, because we know that these elections are coming up at the end of this year. His coronavirus pandemic track record is not very positive as of now. So he really needs something to be able to deflect attention onto and score some positive brownie points from the American people. I'll be back with my next segment after this break. Welcome back, viewers. You're still here on Scope with me, Waqar Rizvi. In this segment, we're going to discuss COVID-19 in Italy, and we've discussed that in the past, of course, on this show as well, but in the context of the European Union, how it's acted towards Italy. But today we're going to talk about just how Italian officials themselves reacted to the coronavirus pandemic, especially in the early days. There now seems to be a growing movement within the country to use the legal system to try to get accountability for those politicians and otherwise who may have downplayed the threat originally and may have then resulted in more people dying because they played down the threat. There are a number of cases now that are being filed, seemingly, in Italian courts, some by relatives of those who have died, as well as some even by doctors' unions and others who are seeking accountability for even doctors and nurses and other medical workers who have also died because of this pandemic at this time. Now, one wonders if this is the right tactic to try to get accountability at this point in time, especially for a country that has had such a hard time with the pandemic to begin with. Let's discuss that a bit further. We're joined now by Giuliano Bifolchi, who is Intelligence Unit Director at ASRIE Analytica. He's joining us now from the Italian capital, Rome. Also joining us from Italy, but this time Turin, is Lorenzo Pregliasco, who is the founding partner of U-Trend. He's also adjunct professor of at the Department of Political and Social Science at the University of Bologna. Lorenzo and Giuliano, thank you both for your time today. Lorenzo, let me start with you. What do you make of how legitimate it is at this point in time to be using a legal course to try to get accountability, possibly at this point in time, especially on the part of those relatives of people who have died?
Well, I think that this was to some extent expectable. On the one hand, you have families seeking justice or seeking compensation for what they consider a mismanagement of the outbreak and of the disease in the early stages. On the other hand, you also have prosecutors and courts starting to, perform investigations about particularly the situation in nursing homes in Italy, where hundreds of people died without being tested. And so we're not sure that they died because of coronavirus, but it is very, very likely. And so I think that both of these aspects were expectable, in that you had a situation which affected so many people across the country, and particularly in the north of the country. So we'll see what the next months will bring to this conversation.
Giuliano, as I said in my introduction, it seems like, a lot of the conversation about Italy was about how the European Union acted towards the country. But do you also think that Italian officials did, at the beginning at least, downplay the threat, and that led to more people dying and or being infected?
So thanks for having me. Thanks for the question. So first of all, I should say that for sure, the central authority, they made mistakes, because at the beginning, if you look also some articles in the media, our official authorities, also our prime minister, they say that it was not a serious threat, and also that we had enough capability to face the coronavirus. There were also some members of the parliament, also like the Zingaretti, like one member of the Democratic Party, who decided to go to Milan to have an aperitif against the coronavirus, and then it turned that he was positive to COVID-19. So the fact is that they tried to communicate to people at the beginning that it was not a serious threat, and for the entire February. And after that, in March, they say, oh no, it's really a serious threat. We should stay at home and we should face this problem. So they change also their communication. And the problem is that also now we have different news, different information. And people in Italy, they are tired of miscommunication. And also that they don't know what is true and what is false now. They cannot believe to the politicians, to the government.
All right, so does this mean that, Lorenzo, for the political establishment going forward, does this mean that far-right groups such as Salvini's group will now rise? I mean, what kind of a political change will this bring forward?
Well, on the one hand, what you're seeing now in Italy, I would say across Europe, but also in Italy, is actually the opposite. So people and public opinions mostly rallying around the government, and so Prime Minister Conte, whose popularity has grown significantly in the last weeks, in spite of the difficulties of the downplaying that many authorities did in the early stages of this disease. On the other hand, you have opportunities for anti-establishment populist forces, such as Salvini's Lega, such as Giorgia Meloni's Fratelli d'Italia, which is a national conservative party growing in polls. But right now you don't see many opportunities for them in the short term, because in the short term, much of the public opinion still approves of what the government has done. And in a way, they see a leadership from the part of Prime Minister Conte. What will happen in the medium term, so in a few months, is still to be debated. And I see some potential for the opposition forces to grow when you have more clarity about the responsibilities and the visible effects of the economic crisis, which is about to hit very hard this country.
Exactly. So, now economic crisis just already upon Italy. Giuliano, I wonder what your thoughts are about the political ramifications of that, because, it's coronavirus, then the economic impact. That's sort of a double whammy, is it not? Yes.
The fact is that regarding the economy, we will have for sure a social economic crisis, because the economy will be hit really hard. And also the fact is that there are some economic decrees, there are some economic strategies, but they are not enough. And also, if you look at the structure of our workers, also the economy in Italy, small and medium entrepreneurs are the core of Italy, and they are really frustrated about the situation. Particularly also the tourism sector is really important for Italy, and we still don't know if we could recover the tourism sector in which way. So the main problem is uncertainty, and there is not a right communication, a clear communication. And also, I should say that probably at the beginning of March, Conte had the support of people, of the Italian citizens, but now he's starting losing his support, because also with the relations with the European Union. Because he says something regarding the economic measures, then he changes his position, they try to adapt. And I cannot completely agree with my colleague from Turin, because we should say that we start also facing some episodes, events of social demonstration. So the situation can change really quickly, and we should see if the government will adapt also its strategy to the needs of the people and the entrepreneurs.
It's interesting also, isn't it, so to see how Italy is now viewing and self-reflecting upon its place within the European Union, right? And that's been, I believe, ever since the Europeans did not just immediately, snap into place and give Italy the kind of help it needed in the early days, at least. Do you think that the Italians will be renewing or reforming possibly even their foreign policies? Because it seems like countries that you would not normally expect to come to Italy's aid did, the likes of the Chinese, the Russians, and others.
Yeah, definitely. You have, again, two levels of conversation here. So the first one is the relationship between Italy and the EU, which, there are ramifications in this regard due to the coronavirus crisis. We had yesterday a European Council summit, which basically said something about the recovery fund after the health crisis, but it's not clear how this will work. And in Italy as well, I would say there is a growing dissatisfaction about the role of the European Union in helping Italy cope with this unprecedented crisis, which will be soon an economic and social crisis. It is already an economic and social crisis, not only a health crisis. On the other hand, you have the emergence of other world powers, China, particularly also Russia, which are trying to, I think, play geopolitically in regard with Italy, which is, as you know, part of the Western Europe and the sphere of influence of the US and NATO. But China and Russia are trying to portray themselves as, true friends of the Italian people. And I think that the current government has inside some parties and some leaderships, particularly the Five Star Movement and Di Maio, the former Five Star leader who is foreign minister, who are quite sensitive to this Chinese and Russian narrative. We'll see whether this will hold or if we will return to the, let's say, traditional spot of our international relations, which is towards Europe and towards the United States.
What do you make, Giuliano, about the foreign policy of Italy? Do you think that will change?
Well, we should also understand if the government will change, because, for instance, 2 or 3 days ago, during the parliament's reunion, like Giorgia Meloni, one of the leaders of Fratelli d'Italia, or far right, she accused Conte that he applied to Italy the same anti-democratic system of China. So she accused, and this is really important because she is from the far right, and she's also an ally of the Salvini of the League. So the thing is that we have different narrative regarding Russia and different narrative regarding China, and also the foreign policy will change if we will have some changes in the government. For sure, we cannot think that Italy will abandon completely the European Union or NATO, because also there are other interests. And what is clear is that Italy can play its cards because it has a strategic position in the middle of the Mediterranean Sea. Unfortunately, we don't have now a strong government or a government ready to play this card.
Okay, Lorenzo, one of the issues I want to come back to within Italy again. When you mentioned it, I believe, in one of your earlier answers about care homes or, the homes where elderly are placed in nursing homes, et cetera. There seems to have been, within Europe especially, a real mismanagement of how the situations within those homes have been handled, right? So even in France, for example, there is this issue of whether the death tally in those homes of deaths is properly being seen, if people within those homes are being properly even treated at this point in time. Do you think that in some ways Italian society or even Europe as a whole will reflect upon how to reform the systems within those nursing homes where elderly are living?
Well, this will need to be assessed, and probably some steps will need to be taken going forward to make sure that, for example, in the event, which is quite likely, sadly, of a new outbreak during this year or the next year, we are prepared to deal with that and to protect the frailest people. When it comes to Italy, I think one very interesting piece of data about nursing homes is a report released by the Italian Health Institute, which shows that, for example, in Lombardy, the region around Milan, which is the hardest hit by the virus, well, in Lombardy, you had roughly 1,600 people dying in nursing homes with symptoms of COVID-19. But out of 1,600 people dying, only 200 roughly were tested and were tested positive for COVID-19. So you're very likely to see in northern Italy, particularly, a huge underestimation of the number of people dying because of coronavirus, especially in nursing homes and especially among elderly people.
Giuliano, what do you think of that? Because, for me, one of the things is that obviously one judges any society by how they treat their most vulnerable, right? And especially the elderly. And in this case, it seems like Italy and other European countries really did fail the elderly when it comes to ensuring that they were getting proper care.
Well, the fact is that the system has the problems. We are discovering only now these problems because we are facing this virus and we are facing a huge threat. So the fact is that inside the society, we knew before this that we had problems in the health system, also in the nurse system, nurse recovery. But we had also some investigations in the past. But now that we are facing the virus, the problem became the reality. And now everyone is asking for justice in some situation or to improve the system. The main problem is that also how we could improve the system if we are going to face a socio-economic crisis in the near future, or we are now facing the socio-economic crisis. And the main question is that we should protect elderly people, the most vulnerable, but we should also to protect young generations because they need to have their futures. So in which way the government will allocate the money? This is the big question.
And that's a very good point. So I'll give you that final word. What do you make of how Italy, or if Italy, will be able to balance that need to, at some point in time soon, really open up its economy so that there is some economic activity so people are earning money versus also protecting people's health?
Well, this would be a major challenge not only for Italy. Maybe Italy is under the spotlight because we were the first ones in Europe as well, at least, to develop a large-scale outbreak in late February. So I think that many will look at the Italian case to see how we will start reopening. Probably in the beginning of May, we will see some things reopening. But I suspect that the major challenge for the country will be how to cope with the economic and social impacts of this, because this is not something which will go away in 1 month. This is probably going to affect our economy and our society for at least all this year and maybe also the next year. So how do you get back to a normality where not only you reopen businesses, but you make sure that the society and all the economic activities are able, to work again in a semi-normal way.
Indeed. All right, we'll leave there as a final word. Appreciate, though, both Lorenzo and Giuliano for their time today and for giving us insight into how Italy has been dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic. We have spoken, of course, about Italy in the past as well. It is one of the hardest hit European countries, certainly, and it was hit early on. And of course, as Lorenzo there said, he was right to say that a lot of us, even around the world, are looking at Italy to try to understand what Italy has done right and wrong, to try to learn from that in our respective countries, and especially Europe will certainly be looking at that as well. Is the legal recourse, though, the way to go for Italians at this point in time to hold their politicians, to hold their leaders to account? Both of our guests seem to agree that it is, because there needs to be accountability at this point in time for the kind of lax attitude that a lot of leaders, not just in Italy, mind you, but other places in the world also had at the beginning of this pandemic. Had they acted then, we may not all have been in this position that we are in now. So yes, maybe resorting to the judiciary and cases is the way to go, not just for Italians, but maybe for other people around the world as well. I'll leave it there for now. I've been Waqar Rizvi. Thanks for watching.